this farm that he starts. He buys the land. And what we know is that he loved the land, because it says the landowner himself actually planted the vineyards. He built a wall around the property to protect his vineyards. But not being living there, he needed people to take care of it. And so he had tenants who lived there, and as a part of their tenancy, their rent, they took care of the land. And the expectation, again, in that part of the world was, of course, that the landlord would get a certain percentage of the crops, or at least the revenue from the sale of the crops. And so this landlord sends his other servants from his home out to where he has this property. And we're told that the tenants beat them up and even killed some of them. Not a good way to treat your landlord, right? And this landlord says, okay, I'll send more folks. So he sends more of his servants, this time in greater numbers. Now let me tell you, if I were those servants, I think I'd be going with a little bit of fear and trepidation if I knew what had happened to the last ones. And the same thing happens. They get beat up. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm starting to think this landlord's crazy. Because, why didn't he get the other authorities in that area? The police, the gendarmes, whatever they are in that part of the world. Why didn't he get some protection when he sent that next set of servants? Well, now he does something I think's even more crazy. That's exactly right. Sends his son. I mean, would you do that? If your hired people you sent just got beat up and killed, would you send your own son? And we know what happens. His son gets killed. What kind of tenants are these? I'm not sure who's more crazy in this story, the landlord or the tenants. Because what do you suppose is going to happen? They're thinking, oh, well, maybe they're thinking, oh, the landlord maybe died, that's why the son came, because the son inherited it. So if we kill the son, then we'll have all this for ourselves. Maybe that's what they're thinking. Well, I still think they're crazy, because first of all, they don't know that. They don't know if the landlord's still around or not. We don't know if the son has siblings, and maybe there's more folks to inherit it before it would end up to be theirs. So I think they're all crazy in this story. And Jesus says to the scribes and Pharisees, the ones he's trying to preach to and trick, and says, so what do you think the landlord should do? And the landlord and the scribes and Pharisees say, anybody remember that part of the story? That's one option. Yep. But they said, yeah, those wretched tenants, get rid of them. And it's an act of the words that are translated, it's like an act of violence that the scribes and Pharisees are saying. Wipe them out. Get them out of there. What kind of tenants are they anyway? And as that parable's been told over the years, most of us relate to all of that. And most of us think that that's what the object of the story is about. But I'm here to tell you that most biblical scholars would say that this parable is an allegory. So, if it's an allegory, who represents what? Well, that's important for us to figure out. Pardon? God is the landowner. You got it. That's the first part. So the landowner is God. Now, let's jump ahead rather than go with the tenants. So if the landowner is God, who's the son? Jesus. And we all know what happened to Jesus, right? Jesus was killed. Because part of when Jesus quotes the Psalms as a part of this parable and says that the builders have rejected the chief cornerstone, he's predicting what's going to happen in his own death. And we know the Pharisees and scribes had a hand in all that, didn't we? So, who are the tenants? That's what we usually think. And that's what most people who heard the parable think. And that's what the scribes and Pharisees were thinking. And they're thinking, we're going to be the good tenants. We'll be the good tenants that are going to replace those bad tenants that were so bad to the landlord. But the reason the scribes and Pharisees kind of went, oops, and were disappointed when they heard the parable, because they realized that they were bad. It wasn't about, look at them over there. It's us. And if you remember where I left off last Sunday, see, I did come back to that, didn't I? Sometimes I remember. I had said to you all that if the scribes and the Pharisees were the authorities in the church back then, who are the authorities in the church today in West Brattleboro? Us. We are. And this parable is meant to us. What kind of tenants are we? God has given us so much. We're the ones who are now tending, taking care of what God has given us. Those tomato plants. See, I know where Reverend Phil's going with his. I'm not worried about him. You get a great example this morning. But what about the rest of us? How much do we give away to others? How much do we do, as Jesus said, about taking care of the poor, the stranger, as we talked about in the Bible studies on Wednesday, the neighbors, widows, the orphans, those who are sick and in prison? When's the last time someone from this church went to prison to visit anybody? I don't know. Haven't heard. That's part of the commandments about taking care of what God has given us. I know that we've done pretty good at taking care of those in our own congregation, but there's more of God's world around this church than just the members of this church. What have we done for them in terms of taking care of God's vineyard? So that's what I would have us all think about this week as we reflect on this scripture. What kind of tenants are we? Are we only looking after ourselves, our own church, our own building? Or are we tending all of God's vineyard? And as the stewardship moments have been this month, and what are we giving back out of all the bounty that God has given us? Lord be with you.